Today, we're going to dive into one of the most consequential, most debated decisions in all of modern history: the use of atomic bombs to end World War II. It's a story of absolutely brutal warfare, a weapon that was once unthinkable, and a single choice that didn't just end a war, it truly changed the world forever.
So let's set the scene. It's August 6, 1945, a Monday morning. Over the city of Hiroshima, Japan, the sky is clear. It's a beautiful summer day. People are just heading to work, kids are settling in at school. Absolutely no one had any idea that in a matter of minutes, their entire world would literally be turned to ash.
You know, even the man who created this weapon, J. Robert Oppenheimer, he immediately understood its awesome, terrifying power. The moment he saw that first successful test, he famously remembered a line from Hindu scripture. He knew, right then and there, that he had unleashed a force that could destroy not just cities, but entire worlds.
At 8:15 in the morning, a single bomb drops. For 43 seconds, it just falls. And then, a silent, blinding flash. A fireball hotter than the surface of the sun vaporized everything and everyone at its center, leaving nothing but shadows burned onto stone. In a single minute, just 60 seconds, an estimated 80,000 people were gone, and 70% of a bustling city just ceased to exist.
The scale of that destruction is it's almost impossible to really wrap your head around. So the question is, how on earth did it come to this? How did humanity get to a point where a decision like this was even on the table? Well, to understand that, we've got to go back.
Right. This moment, this flash over Hiroshima, it didn't just happen overnight. No, it was the climax of years and years of imperial ambition, of economic warfare, and this escalating conflict between two global powers on a collision course.
So you can trace it all back to the 1930s, when Imperial Japan was on a mission, aggressively expanding its empire across Asia to get its hands on resources. The United States wanted to stop this, so they hit Japan where it hurt the most: its oil. With a crippling embargo cutting off 80% of its supply, Japan felt backed into a corner, and they saw only one way out. They launched that devastating surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, hoping to take out the U.S. Pacific Fleet and force America into a war it had been trying so hard to avoid.
And the attack on Pearl Harbor, it just lit the fuse on this new, incredibly brutal front in World War II. What came next was a grueling, island-hopping war across the Pacific, and it was marked by a ferocity, a fanaticism that shocked Allied forces again and again.
And to really get why this part of the war was so brutal, you have to understand the mindset of the Japanese military. They were indoctrinated with this modified Bushido code, death before dishonor. Surrender was the ultimate humiliation. It just wasn't an option. And this fanaticism led to tactics like the kamikaze suicide attacks, and soldiers fighting literally to the last man, which turned every single island campaign into an absolute bloodbath.
All of this brutal no-surrender fighting, it all came to a head at the Battle of Okinawa. This was the last major stop before a potential invasion of mainland Japan. In this battle, it became this horrifying preview of what that full-scale invasion would look like. Its cost would directly, and I mean directly, influence the decision to use the bomb.
I mean, look at these numbers. They're just staggering. Over 60,000 U.S. casualties. But the Japanese lost nearly their entire garrison of 110,000 soldiers, plus an estimated 100,000 civilians caught in the crossfire. American leaders looked at this carnage, and they made a chilling calculation. A full invasion of Japan, codenamed Operation Downfall, could cost up to 1 million American lives and millions more Japanese.
Then in April 1945, President Franklin Roosevelt dies, and suddenly the immense weight of ending this brutal war lands squarely on the shoulders of his Vice President Harry Truman, a man who was about to be told about a top-secret project that would give him an entirely new and frankly terrifying option.
It was called the Manhattan Project, and it was one of the biggest, most expensive, and most secret undertakings in history. Its one and only purpose: to harness the power of the atom itself and turn it into a weapon. And after a successful test out in the New Mexico desert in July 1945, Truman suddenly had a weapon that could, potentially, end the entire war in an instant.
But before using it, the Allies gave Japan one last chance. It was called the Potsdam Declaration, and it demanded unconditional surrender. It warned of prompt and utter destruction if they refused. But Japan, completely unaware of the true nature of this new threat, they ignored the ultimatum. For them, surrender was still just unthinkable.
And so, the bombs fell. First on Hiroshima, and then, just 3 days later, on Nagasaki. What followed was the end of the Second World War, and the beginning of this intense, fierce ethical debate that is still raging to this very day.
You know, the sequence of events at the end was just incredibly fast. First, Hiroshima. Then, 2 days later, the Soviet Union declares war on Japan and invades Manchuria from the west. That was a huge blow. And then came the second bomb, on Nagasaki. So now, facing total destruction from the air and a new invasion on the ground, Japan's Supreme Council was deadlocked. They couldn't decide. Until Emperor Hirohito himself did something unprecedented. He stepped in and made the final decision to surrender.
So, here it is, the great debate. Was it the right call? This is where it gets so incredibly complex. On one hand, supporters say it absolutely saved lives, millions of them, by avoiding that bloody ground invasion, and it ended the war fast. On the other hand, critics will tell you that it was the intentional targeting of civilians, a war crime. They argued there were other options, like a demonstration bomb, and that maybe, just maybe, the Soviet invasion was the real reason Japan surrendered. There are just no easy answers here.
You see, these explosions did way more than just end a war. They cast a nuclear shadow over the entire globe, starting a new age of anxiety and leaving a legacy of both deterrence and constant fear.
And the ultimate human cost. It's just gut-wrenching. When you factor in the initial blasts and then all the slow, painful deaths from radiation sickness in the months and years that followed, the total death toll is somewhere around 200,000 people. And here's the key thing to remember. Over 95% of them were civilians, not soldiers. And perspectives on this event, as you can imagine, remain deeply, deeply divided, often right down national lines. A survey from 1991 found that 63% of Americans believed the bombings were justified, but only 29% of Japanese felt the same way. It's just a stark reminder of how our own memory and national experience can shape how we see history.
So all of this, it leaves us with an almost impossible moral problem. It's one thing to debate history, but it's another thing entirely to face that choice. In the brutal calculus of war, where do you draw the line? And is the weight of a choice like that, deciding the fate of hundreds of thousands of people, something any single human being should ever have to carry? It's a question that, thankfully, no one has had to answer since.